Finally, on today's SNL edition of TVL, you might be wondering, how do we get such incredible performers and creatives bringing legendary productions to life just year after year? Well, to help answer that, we have Teresa Gawrych, an instructor at the University of Alabama, here to talk how creativity is taught and nurtured in today's generation. Teresa, thank you so much for coming on. This is such a topic I'm particularly passionate about, and I want to start first. Again, creativity, it's such a beautiful concept and talent that many people have. Do you think it can be taught? Does anyone have it to some extent, or how do you kind of really foster an environment where it thrives?
I think creativity can be something that's innate in people, but sometimes you do have to, like you said, create an environment that makes them feel like it's a safe place. I feel like a lot of students in education now are taught to regurgitate and memorize, and not as often to flex those creative muscles. So I try to make sure that there's an environment which students can feel like they can be themselves while still pushing creative ideas that sometimes work and sometimes don't.
And you mentioned too, again, that idea of sometimes work, sometimes don't. I'm curious how you kind of really help them embrace the creative process, right? Because it can feel kind of trial and error. Sometimes you put things out there, it doesn't really land. How do you kind of give, again, these students the self-confidence to go for it, or maybe even kind of go back to the drawing board and rethink of new ideas?
One thing I tell them is that a creative idea in the brainstorming process is a good idea. Even though we might ultimately not use it, it could spark another idea. So that seems to let students feel comfortable enough to share all their ideas, even if they're wacky or they don't work. And stuff is difficult to land, especially in comedy, because sometimes it can be something that's more personal or something that, you know, the masses can actually laugh at and agree with.
Do you think the current media landscape being so heavily influenced by social media, short form content, AI, right, TikTok, so many different forms of, again, this kind of comedic influence, do you think that's kind of shaped how students are now creating and thinking about their work?
I think for some students, it does help them, feel comfortable to be creative because they see so many other people doing it. However, it does often make them want to shoot vertical video, which we don't really like in my field. So I think it's been helpful for some students, but then they also are used to creating such short content that sometimes when you ask them to, create something longer, it's a little bit more of a challenge. So sometimes you might have to help them through that process a little bit more.
I want to point out as well that your class actually once created kind of a live SNL style parody show, right? What did you see students learn from that experience? And again, how did it really impact their confidence as creators?
In that class, I actually leave assignments open so the students can kind of pick an assignment that they're interested in. And I just set, benchmarks of things I want them to learn within that. I think that Saturday Night Live, we called it Monday Night Live, was a chance for them to flex their writing skills, come up with costume ideas. They had to do set dressing. So it applied a lot of things that they learn in different individual classes into one in an environment that was a team-oriented situation, as opposed to trying to do it on their own in a homework situation.
Well, we know that you do such a great job, again, of just creating this environment where students can express, again, freedom of expression, have the freedom to be innovative and take risks. I'm curious too, I always think, I admire teachers so much for, again, encouraging this next generation to take on new challenges. But I can only imagine too, you've learned a lot in the process as well. What has this been like for you as an instructor, and how do you think other people watching, again, whether student or not student, I think we're all students of life in some ways, but how can we also be more creative? In what ways have you learned that yourself?
One thing I've learned is you can't pour from an empty cup. If I am not taking care of myself creatively and just what I need to do to feel like a well-versed and happy person, that's difficult sometimes to be creative. I also encourage students to be technical. Some students just want to create things and make it creative, but then they don't realize that the technical can hold back their creativity. So once you get students really comfortable with using equipment or using their voice in writing, you can then see that they are more comfortable and less anxious. And then I think that allows the creativity to flow. So I always recommend to students or other professionals, figure out what your pre-production process is. What do you need to do to set yourself up to feel less anxious, to feel like you can be your entire creative self.
Wonderful. Well, Teresa, again, we know that it's a beautiful line of work that you're in. We know that being a teacher is no easy feat, especially teaching in kind of a creative landscape. We know that that can present a number of challenges. We know that you do it so well. Thank you again so much for coming on. It's been a fun day, as you might have imagined, with the kind of an SNL themed show, and so we'd love to have been able to incorporate you with that as well. So thank you again so much, and roll tide to you. Appreciate it.
Roll Tide.